With that, I'm really excited to bring us to our fireside chat portion of the event. So I would like to bring up with me on the virtual stage Sachi Doshi, who's the acting lead for strategy and research and emerging technology advisor at USAID, and also Caitlin Kraft-Buchman, who is the CEO and founder of Women at the Table. Hello, wonderful to have the two of you here with me today. And I think just to kick off our conversation together, I'd love to hear from you, Caitlin, about some of your work at Women at the Table, and particularly the A+ Alliance for Inclusive Algorithms. How does this initiative work to advance equitable AI? And yeah, just share a little bit more.
So hi, thanks. So we've been working at Women at the Table on this for quite some time. We started in 2017 with our first convening with the Women's Rights Division of the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights. We take a human rights-based approach. So in general, we love responsible AI, we love ethical AI, we love equitable AI, but we really think it needs a human rights-based point of departure in order for it to be meaningful, and in order to have definitions that sort of work across the globe and across many different sectors. So I'm a little, so lack of definition, of course, is always very difficult. And that's why we sort of promote this human rights-based approach for a lot of different reasons. I'd seen, and I will talk about the A+ Alliance, but in your grantee learnings that you said that some of your grantees said that the equitable AI is something that doesn't make equity worse, makes me so terribly sad, because we know that gender neutral anything is the lowest bar possible, because all it does is uphold the status quo. And all of us who work in gender and as gender specialists, work awfully hard. And the battle shouldn't be to keep things at the level of bias as they are for gender, race, class, caste at all. That we need to be, at the very least, gender responsive, and then move into our goal, doing everything that we do, having a gender transformative point of view, and at least have that as its mission, if not. So the A+ Alliance was founded in 2019, and it focuses is just to make sure, we very quickly found out our first goal was to make sure to mitigate bias and get rid of bias in machine learning, because we saw that as a real threat in 2019. But about 6 months in, we thought, why are we working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to keep things exactly where they are? Again, gender neutral status quo. So we have begun to do a lot of work on course correction of algorithms. In other words, as long as we're going into this new universe where everything is going to be digitized, to take a moment, not just to take the Excel spreadsheet and just sort of race to sort of make it, supercharge it, but to really think about what is the purpose of the digitization, and can we use some of the nuance that's afforded us by having hundreds of thousands of data points as opposed to a few data points in Excel, to really think about how we can allocate resources in a much more efficient, much more equitable, much more humane and just way. So this is this course correction. And indeed, our original name for our organization was the A+ Alliance for Affirmative Action for Algorithms. But some of my colleagues felt that was political, so we went to inclusive algorithms. But there you go. But this idea of affirmative action, of really what can we do to take things and to sort of level the playing field. We then went on, and I'll stop in a minute, but I think it's salient to this. The A+ Alliance has an offshoot called the FAIR Network, which is the Feminist AI Research Network, which has been lucky enough through its funder, which is IDRC, to be able to subgrant and to work on proof of concept for some of these transformative ways of looking at algorithmic justice. So we have a paper prototype pilot model, and indeed Pitt Policy Lab has a different project called La Independiente, which is quite extraordinary, which is a platform for women gig workers. And just to see about how would that work in Latin America. anyway, there are a lot of different projects there. But basically, our work is advocacy. And then on the other hand is really to try to create real projects with proof of concept and code that show that it is possible to make algorithms that work, maybe not at scale, but are locally based, that really include communities and provide real value for the people who are the beneficiaries.
I love that.
Long-
Yeah, I love the work that you're doing. And I think the point around like as a community, really pushing ourselves to move towards gender transformative, I think that's like a really important point, and something that is really key to keep in mind. Sachi, I'd love to hear a little bit more from you. And, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges in the space of equitable AI, perhaps a bigger challenge, and any other thing you that came to mind as Caitlin was talking?
Yeah, I mean, first, hi, Caitlin. It's so nice to be chatting with you again. Thank you, Genevieve, for hosting this. I am so excited that we're on our 6th session. Also a little sad that it's our last one for now. Let's hope we can keep this going. But Caitlin, you neglected to mention your AI and human rights toolbox, which is so great. And it's something that we should be maybe adding to our resource list, and we will do that. I just think that organizations that are working on similar issues should be just coordinated a bit more than we are. But that's besides the point. Your question to me is, what have I learned along the way, and what are the challenges that I'm still seeing? So, I think my main observation, having gone through this process with our wonderful grantees of the Equitable AI Challenge, is that AI is here. It's happening. Sometimes I don't even know if we should call it an emerging technology. It's like here, it's baked, it's part of the things that we are working on. And just this challenge is another example of it. Like we see it in education, through the PIT Policy Labs work. We've seen it in finance, and it's widespread, the use of financial tools. And we're seeing governments adopt it. We're seeing banks adopt it. We're seeing organizations like ours who work in the space adopt it. And so I think what is missing, though, while it's starting to get more and more mainstream, is that we're not considering the impact of the work. I think we're focusing, just as Caitlin was saying, we're focusing so much more on the innovation and the efficiency and all of that it can bring, and it can. That's why it's so exciting. I think that the other side of the coin doesn't get the same level of attention, which is why I think this kind of work, what we do, is so important. And I think the reason we launched this challenge is to start to build on evidence, as Caitlin does, as other organizations who are doing similar work do, and really show that intentionally focusing on equity, on responsible AI, can make a difference, and I think that that's what we've tried to demonstrate through the work that we've done here. And so I've been just so inspired with all of our grantees. Like if we don't do this, we risk increasing social inequalities. And that's so much of the work that we've been working on over the past few decades when it comes to gender, but all the work that Chris has been working on. And we don't want to go backwards, we want to go forward. And so we have to be much more intentional about the way that we use AI, evaluate AI, understand its implications, understand who's in the room and who's impacted by it. And so this work is worth doing, is my biggest takeaway, that we need to do it and we need to keep doing it. We can't stop. We can't stop with this. And that's why I hope that we will be able to continue this work moving forward. And so even though these are small efforts, we have 5 grants through this Equitable AI Challenge here. It's not huge. They're small things. But we've learned that we can influence people, large actors, even with small efforts. And I think that is reflected in the work that Chica and company talked about, and Kate and Christina talked about before. And that's that we can influence large actors if we work in an intentional way. We have been able to help the government in Guanajuato shift processes. We've been able to work with companies like Rappi in Mexico to think about how to do gender differentiated credit scoring and potential values that it might shift for them. The other thing that I've realized is that while this group, like I said, the people who work on the other side of the coin when it comes to AI and responsible AI is small, they can have a lot of impact. And so it's up to organizations like ours to center them, to raise their voices, to give them resources so that they can continue to do that work. We can't match up to the amount of resources being put into AI development generally, but we can't not be elevating this work. So even as we are evaluating how AI can add value for development, we need to pay, I would argue, not just equal, but probably more attention on the impact of AI on different communities so that we don't see worsening social and economic divide. I'll stop there. There's a lot more I can say, but I can also talk about the things that I'm really excited about that we've learned.
Yeah, no, such important reflections for sure. And it's been a journey, but as you were talking, I mean, I think kind of the default is an inequitable status quo. And if we don't prioritize this and really think about justice and, and equity in every aspect of it, then it will go to that default. So those are some really important points. Caitlin, any other thoughts from you that are coming up in that regard?
Yeah, well, I'd like to think of this as a great opportunity because the world is being rewired now. So, and I do think that a little bit of, the talk of existential risk that some of our colleagues talk about in some way take away agency from us, as if it's inevitable, it's coming, there's nothing that we can do, and this just is the way it is. It's a system that we've inherited. But the fact of the matter is we can invent the systems that we want, and we need to leverage the lever, the tools and the levers that we can to get there. And some of that is proof of concept. But I do want to bring up something which it came up with the Hausa example with our colleagues Mary and Chika, that we're seeing with generative AI. So everything's very, very supercharged as it is, but we know with generative AI now, everybody, not that was used in that particular project. But what we're seeing is that people are using generative AI and the sort of autocomplete, and there are two or three things that they're not considering. One is that the biases that we researchers have uncovered in English have gotten fixed, we presume, mostly in English, but they are not fixed in the languages of the UN, which would be low resource languages, those 6 languages, no less Hausa or Urdu or Catalan or any languages that are not English. So all of the gender norms, all of the biases, all of the kind of stereotypes, the nuanced stereotypes, really, and not even like the sort of super exclusionary stuff, but just, he's hardworking, she is lazy, which was one of my favorite Google translations into Hungarian. We are reaffirming millennia's worth of bias, and we need to be super, super careful now about what's happening. So this idea of what low resource languages are, that means like everything that's not English. I don't think it's fair to call it low resource. It seems like it's very marginal, but it's not. It's so super important. And I think the other thing is that, again, from our Nigerian colleagues' work, we see that it's also so context specific, that these kind of chatbots and the generative AI really cannot handle the kind of, first of all, local idiom, but also actually can't, even if it was in very classical, sort of diagrammed English, I don't think could handle a normal person explaining a symptom to it. So we ought not to depend on this technology to give us those kinds of answers at all, but just to maybe even be shifting ourselves and be saying, how can it be additive? How can it help a community health worker? How can it help a policymaker, but not really be giving, not being even assistive? I would just call it additive. And that's, I think that's something that we're really going to have to come back, because people naturally want to give it agency when it should not have that amount of power.
Yeah, really appreciate that. Super interesting. And thanks for sharing. As anyone has any questions, feel free to drop those in the Q&A. And as people are thinking of any questions, the last question I have for the two of you is, the field of AI, and Caitlin, you just spoke to this, but especially generative AI, is moving so fast. And I'm just curious, where do you see the future of equitable AI heading in particular? And what's kind of the role of grant makers and donors as we think about this? So feel free, either one of you, to jump in to start.
Well, I'll jump to say that we need more funding. I mean, there are very, very few people that are thinking, are thoughtfully thinking about how to make grants in this area. We need more and more and more research, but I think that we need applied research and a little less classical kind of PhD research about saying this is bad and this is why it's bad, because it's moving too quickly. I think we can start with, it doesn't work, but this is how it could work. I think we have to work more creatively, think more about what are the solutions? How could this be harnessed, as opposed to only talking about the bad effects, which are massive, as we know, but we're never going to get ahead of it unless we look at those opportunities. And in terms of, because Sachi was kind enough to mention our AI and Equality Human Rights Toolbox, I want to say that the approach that we're taking with that is that there are never going to be any tools that fix this. As you all may know, because you're practitioners, there are 21 different mathematical definitions of fairness, mathematical. We know that there's certainly that many sociocultural definitions. So there's never going to be any, like a tech fix to the tech problem. But what we can do is that we can all train ourselves across disciplines to be able to have conversations, policymakers with technologists, with anthropologists and social workers, and just really in a group, and to really interrogate what we're trying to do. Like, what's the objective? Who's benefiting? And also to engage communities at the very, very first moment of conception, and let this all be a community-owned process. I think that that's a switch that would benefit us all. Yeah.
I love that. That's a great message. Making the community-owned process. Absolutely. Sachi.
Yeah, I can't echo that enough. And I was going to say, some of the things I'm most excited about are whenever I hear examples of like locally led innovations in this space. And I was just in Kenya, and we met at this conference, and we met these awesome entrepreneurs who are working in DRC and are using publicly available tools like Mozilla's Common Voice dataset to make it easier for women in rural DRC to be able to understand what the law says when it comes to their land rights. Because when their husbands die, usually they lose access to their land and they have nothing. And so through this kind of a tool, a voice-activated tool, some of these people cannot read and write. And so voice is so critical. These are the kinds of things, Caitlin, like you're talking about. What is actually going to work on the ground, right? Like text is great, but it's not for everybody. So we need to think about the solutions that meet people on the ground for the problems that they're having. And so this explains that there are laws in place, that their other family members can't just come and like take their land from them. And so they can like ask just a regular phone, questions, and then get responses back using voice activated technology. So these are like positive ways in which these technologies can make a difference. And I think that we need to be, empowering those people who are doing the local work, who are using AI in ways that can actually empower the communities around them. And, just to your question about where is equitable AI heading? I'm optimistic. I think that there are a lot of challenges, but I think lots of us are waking up to these challenges too. I think we need to just not miss this moment. We need to meet it. And I think there are some critical things that we can do, right? We can start to create benchmark data sets that are inclusive. We had a chat with OpenAI, like they don't have benchmark data sets for languages in most languages around the world, but even the benchmarking criteria that they have only work for a handful of languages, right? So these are the types of things donors like us can do, is push for, so that we can build and validate these tools in ways that are actually helping the majority of the world. We can also, be thinking critically about which viewpoints are not represented in our existing data sets and be intentionally working to fix them. But again, without being normative about it, there are communities who may not want to be represented in certain data sets. And so we have to respect that. Like inclusion is not always just the default. And so I think being sensitive to what the community needs are. So I love that Caitlin ended with community-led. And then finally, we need to, advocate for policy and regulatory measures. There's just a lot of gaps. Lots of governments do not understand how to regulate this field. And they're much more, again, excited about the potential it can bring, the GDP growth that can happen with the use of AI, and less on the potential harms it can create and already wide social divides in their countries. So that's a lot of the work that still needs to get done, but I think it can. And I think what's really needed is for so many of us as donors, because you asked that question, to be better coordinated. And we're starting to do that. Do not duplicate each other's efforts. Do not just keep funding pilots that may or may not, be scalable, and to build on evidence we already have. We have a lot of evidence, and be coordinated in the way that we to allocate our funding so that we're really filling key gaps in the AI ecosystem, so that we're creating a level playing field that we can build on. So we don't look back 5 years from now and say, we just let 1,000 flowers bloomed, but like they all died. So I really hope that that's what we do now. And I think I'm seeing signs of it, and the onus is on us.
Yeah, appreciate that for sure. And I think those are some great kind of call to actions, not just for practitioners, but for donors, grant makers, like USAID in moving forward. And, definitely love the points that you both were making around inclusion does not equal equity. And we have to hold ourselves to higher account when we think about this space. It's moving really quickly. There's a lot that can be done. And there's a lot that should be done, and love some of those different ideas. And again, thinking about locally led innovations, AI technologies are classification technologies, and they reflect different values. So that's super important.